So you ever wonder how the world actually coordinates its fight against climate change? It's this massive puzzle, right? Stretching from these huge global treaties all the way down to a single country's policies. Today, we're going to put the pieces together and reveal the global climate playbook. Let's dive in.
I mean, that's the central question, isn't it? When a problem is truly global, affecting every single one of us, how do you create a plan that everyone can actually get behind? What does the world's playbook for climate action really look like? Well, that's exactly what we're about to break down.
Right, so every big plan, every grand strategy, it's got to have a solid foundation, a set of ground rules that everyone agrees on. And for climate change, that foundation was laid way back in 1992.
Say hello to the UNFCCC. You can really think of it like the basic operating system for all global climate action. It was launched at the famous Rio Earth Summit, and its goal was super ambitious but also very clear: stabilize the greenhouse gas concentrations in our atmosphere. Now, it didn't set, hard and fast binding limits, but what it did do is create the essential framework for every single agreement that would come later. It totally set the stage.
Okay, so with that foundation in place, the world started building. And this next phase, it was all about turning that broad objective from the UNFCCC into real, concrete, actionable strategies. And that's a journey that takes us from a city you've probably heard of, Kyoto, all the way to Paris. So let's just quickly trace the big steps on this timeline. After the UNFCCC in '92, we got the Kyoto Protocol. But the real game changer, the one that completely flipped the script on how the world takes on climate change, that landed in 2015 with the Paris Agreement.
And this slide really gets to the heart of that huge strategic shift. On the one hand, you had the Kyoto Protocol. That was what we call top-down. A central authority set binding targets. But, and this is a big but, only for developed nations. Then the Paris Agreement comes along and flips that completely. It's bottom-up. It requires every single nation to create its own climate plan. And that right there fosters a much bigger sense of shared responsibility. The whole idea is to build up that collective ambition.
So, what was the big headline goal of the Paris Agreement? It was this: to keep the global average temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's a really critical threshold that scientists have pointed to for years.
But you know what? It didn't even stop there. The agreement also pushed the world to go for an even more ambitious target, trying to limit that temperature increase to just 1.5 degrees Celsius. Why? Because we know that even that half a degree can help us avoid some of the most severe impacts.
And, of course, money talks. The agreement also pushed developed countries to pull together $100 billion a year starting in 2020 to help developing nations with their own climate mitigation and adaptation work.
So this is absolutely crucial. The engine that really drives the whole Paris Agreement is this concept of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Basically, each country sets its own targets. But here's the kicker. Here's the key rule. Every 5 years, they have to come back to the table with a new plan, and it has to be even more ambitious than their last one.
All right, so we've seen the big global framework, but what does this actually look like on the ground? How does it translate into real action? Let's zoom in on one major player, India, to see exactly how a national strategy takes shape. So here are India's core commitments under its own national plan, its NDC. First, cut the emissions intensity of its economy. What does that mean? Basically, using less carbon to produce every dollar of GDP. Second, a huge shift to cleaner energy. And third, create a massive carbon sink. We're talking about planting enough trees to literally absorb billions of tons of CO2 right out of the atmosphere.
And this chart does a great job of showing that second goal. The pledge is to get 40% of the country's entire installed electric power capacity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. For a rapidly growing economy like India's, that's a monumental transformation. It's huge.
Okay, so pledges are one thing, but actually making them happen, that's a whole other ballgame. So let's take a look at how India is building the policies needed to turn these ambitious goals into a reality.
And this right here is the Master Plan, the National Action Plan on Climate Change, or NAPC. And it's not just one single policy. Think of it more like a suite of 8 different core missions, each one targeting a specific area, everything from solar energy to water conservation. And they're all designed to work together to hit the country's climate goals.
And just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about here, one of those 8 missions, the National Solar Mission, set a target to install 100,000 megawatts of solar capacity.
That's just a massive, massive push into renewable energy.
Now here's another really clever initiative. It's called the Perform, Achieve, and Trade Scheme, or PAT. It's a really smart market-based system. So the government sets energy efficiency targets for big industries. If a company does better than its target, it earns these certificates that it can actually sell. But if it falls short, well, then it has to go out and buy those certificates to comply. It creates a real, tangible financial incentive to get more energy efficient.
And here's another direct financial tool. India put in place a type of carbon tax called a clean energy cess on all coal. The money that's raised from that tax goes into a national fund, which is then used to finance clean energy projects all over the country. It's a really direct way of making the polluter pay for the solution.
Okay, so we've seen the global plan, and we've drilled down into a national strategy. But how does the world actually check its own homework? How does it keep score? Let's zoom back out to the international level.
This is the big accountability mechanism built right into the Paris Agreement. It's called the Global Stocktake. So every 5 years, the whole world comes together to look at the data, to assess our collective progress towards those big goals, and, really importantly, to identify where the gaps are. It's basically the world's climate report card.
And hey, this isn't some abstract idea for the future. The very first global stocktake just happened in 2023. So for the first time ever, we got a really comprehensive look at where we stand as a planet in this collective fight.
So think about it. The global playbook is set, from the big UN treaties all the way down to national policies. And the first report card is in. The system is working, in a sense. But it all boils down to this one single crucial question. Now that we know where we stand, how will the world respond? How will we raise our ambition for the next critical chapter?